next time on Nature.
See it Sunday at 8 on Iowa Public Television.
IPTV.
Iowa Public Television. Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television.
It's the stuff of which novels are made, or soap operas. An attractive, intelligent, well-educated black woman surfaces at the 11th hour to level lurid charges of sexual harassment against the president's nominee for the highest court of the land. The nominee, an intelligent, attractive, well-educated man who is also black, says he's the victim of a lynching. Juan, can Clarence Thomas's nomination survive this?
I don't know. Clearly the script has had many turns since it started. It may have more. It's quite a novel. I do have a lot of prayers for the people involved. There's a high human toll here.
Carl?
Only if they destroy the woman's credibility entirely. And they're at work on that right now.
Charles?
Gordon, it changes every hour. As of Friday night, Thomas was dead. As of Saturday noon, he was revived. As of now, he does not have the votes. But who knows what lurks between now and 6 p.m. Tuesday.
Tina?
Gordon, I'd say I agree with Carl, and I think that unless the Republicans do a better job than they have so far of convincing the Senate and the American people that either Anita Hill is crazy or has a real motive to lie, that the Thomas nomination is probably dead.
The nation stood still to listen to Anita Hill, a very persuasive witness. Then Clarence Thomas counterattacked. He was angry. He was impassioned. He attacked not Anita Hill, he attacked the Senate Judiciary Committee. We'll get to Anita Hill in a moment. Let me ask you about Clarence Thomas's tactic. At first, he categorically denies the charges. Then he attacks the committee, saying that he is a victim as a black man. Carl?
Well, you know, there are many tragic aspects of this thing, but here's Clarence Thomas, who has gone for half of his life saying to blacks, don't go around blaming racism. He gets in trouble, and all of a sudden he's saying they're doing this to me because I'm a black man. This is a high-tech lynching. He wants Americans to believe that this black woman, Anita Hill, is carrying the rope with which they're going to hang him. I don't think he can sell it.
Well, I think the only way that you would sell that, Carl, is if Anita Hill, if people believe that Anita Hill was really part of some conspiracy, and I don't think that anyone, even people who don't totally agree with her story, buy that. I think, though, that people might say that given the fact that Thomas had such different points of view on a range of issues from a number of the civil rights groups, that people were after him.
Juan, you're the man of the hour on this story. Is Clarence Thomas the victim of a political attack, unprincipled political attack?
I think as a reporter, just looking at the way that things have gone, I don't think there's anybody who would say that that leak was anything but a political act intended to try to undercut the nomination. I think people might feel that the committee had not done its job sufficiently in looking at what Anita Hill had alleged, but clearly there were people who were dissatisfied with the process and corrupted the process.
Well, I think everything that you've said is true, Juan. I mean, how did we get here? It may be tragic and sad and pathetic and awful that we saw the kind of spectacle we did this week, but the fact is this woman is very credible, she's very intelligent, she's very articulate, she did come forward, and the Republicans and Judge Thomas have not been able to shoot enough holes in her story so far.
I don't know if that is true. I think she is a remarkable witness, probably one of the great witnesses of all time. She's cool and calm and collected. But there's her presentation on the one hand. On the other hand is the evidence. I mean, I do not think she responded to the obvious questions people have. Why did she follow Clarence Thomas to another job if he had done these absolutely horrible things? There's a lot of other evidence here. For example, there are a lot of people whom she is now essentially calling liars. For example, the Washington Post reporter who reported that she had said, and the quote is, "I never called him to say hello," unquote. That's what she said. She later said, "I never said that to the Washington Post," and she acknowledged that, in fact, she did call several times to say hello. This is not a witness who does not have problems.
Gordon, but let me, wait a minute,
The
Gordon.
facts are, you know, can be argued both ways on the way she answered that question. Much of her answer was that she called to respond to his calls, or she called on behalf of somebody else.
But in fact, she made calls which were logged in as called to say hello, period. No response to his call, not on behalf of another person. But the larger issue is if a man treats you the way that Clarence Thomas treated her, she says, why do you go with him to another job when your job where you were was secure? And she made no inquiries in her old job to stay there.
Because you're ambitious.
Let me, but I don't want to get away from your basic question, because this is where I disagree with my two colleagues here. Open season on Clarence Thomas. Character assassination, Charles has written. Open season, if you know anything about history, it was open season on Thurgood Marshall for the Second Court of Appeals. They went after him for a single year. It was open season on Hainsworth. It was open season on Abe Fortas. Going after these guys means nothing unless you can find something on them. So I don't like to see this campaign to make Clarence Thomas a martyr. And I can tell you, if I'd had that leak, I would have gone public with it, because the greater disgrace would have been for this stuff never to come out.
But Carl, it's more than just the question of the leak. There was what preceded it for 100 days, and that was Senate staffers and others interested in destroying Clarence Thomas, destroying him as a man and destroying him politically, calling up everybody who ever knew him, including reporters who interviewed him, including Juan, among others, and saying, do you have any dirt, anything, give us anything that you have on this man. That kind of canvassing, I think, brings American politics to a new low.
It's
not new.
Tell us about
I think
the calls,
it is a little bit different. I think it is a little bit different, Carl, because I think that if you look back at Hainsworth, if you look back at any of these other nominees, people went after them to see what was in their background, to see what they had done during their careers, to find out that Hugo Black had been in the KKK. People were looking after that kind of information. And he was, and he was confirmed. But let me just finish here. Right, but that's right. But they did not go into this kind of personal business and put it on national TV in this way. And that's what I think reaches a new low.
Hey, now wait just a second. I don't think it's personal business if indeed it is a valid charge. And let's say for a moment that Anita Hill's charge is credible, as many people believe it is. If it's a valid charge that the head of the EEOC, who is supposed to oversee and protect women's rights in this issue, was actually sexually harassing his own aide, that's not a personal issue between two people. That is an important issue that goes to whether this man should be appointed to the Supreme Court.
I agree with you. I think that you're actually absolutely right.
Question here is, and let's talk about this, who's telling the truth? Saturday morning I heard Patricia King, Georgetown University law professor, say either Anita Hill is telling the truth or she's a sociopath. Now, how do you answer that question? I mean, who's telling the truth?
Well, I'll tell you why it's so extraordinarily difficult. It's that we are looking at at least a single example of cognitive dissonance. Either Anita Hill is a pathological liar, or Clarence Thomas is weird, odd, perhaps ill in some way. But these are the actions of a very, very sick man, if what he said and did really happen. The problem is we've watched each of them on television. She does not look like a pathological liar. He does not look like a sick man. And that's why it's very hard to square what has to be true in one or the other of these cases.
There is nothing in her history to indicate that she is a pathological liar.
And nothing in his history to indicate that he is this kind of weird sexual guy. Look, we all know sexual jerks, and one characteristic of them is that they act that way towards almost everybody, or towards a lot of people. It's extremely unusual to find a person who acts in this very odd and weird way towards only one person in one circumstance and nobody else. There are 17 women who worked for him who have gone on the record as saying there is not a shred of evidence in this guy's history of any actions of this sort. You have 17 on one side and 1 on the other.
What about his credibility? Do you believe him when he says he never discussed Roe v. Wade, even with his wife?
Look, there is political lying, which every politician in the country does. A politician who stands up in an election campaign and says, I will not raise taxes, or I love you all, or
I'm shocked you're saying there's political lying, but there's not personal lying?
No, politicians tell stories, and they also flatter the voters in many areas, and they walk lines which everybody understands. This is very different. This is denying that an event in his life actually happened. That's a whole different category.
Well, let me tell you where I come out so far. I absolutely do not believe Clarence Thomas. I believe the conversations took place. I think he's lying, and she may be over-dramatizing a few aspects of it, but I think the woman is telling the truth because there is just no evidence that she's come out of Fantasy Island or that she's a sociopath or...
but there is evidence. There is a man called Doggart, and if he is a witness who is convincing, his story is she had a sexual fantasy or a romantic fantasy about him. And if that is true, then it would show that this is a woman who's...
Have you seen his affidavit?
I've seen the affidavit. I haven't seen him. I want to see...
You know who I think...
Did you find the affidavit convincing?
Yes.
You know who I think is fantasizing? Doggett.
Well,
I mean, a guy who will come forward and say, there I was at this party and this woman took me over in the corner.
Why is he a pathological liar?
I don't know that he's a pathological liar, but he wants to say that everybody is upset because he didn't go to bed with him.
You know what I find amusing in this whole discussion is the people would hang so much on Clarence Thomas saying he had not discussed Roe v. Wade, and everyone assumes that this is like, oh, but everyone's discussed Roe v. Wade. I think people in this country, almost unanimously, everyone, would have an opinion on the question of abortion, pro-choice or anti, but I don't think that everyone in this country has read briefs in Roe v. Wade and had extensive discussions of Roe v. Wade.
It was decided when he was in law school?
This is a situation where you have nominees, namely David Souter, namely Anthony Kennedy, who have come through and basically said the same thing, and I didn't hear a peep like this, and it strikes me as a terrific double standard here.
What Clarence Thomas is being sunk on is the issue of credibility, and phone logs to the contrary, and Orrin Hatch's efforts to say that Ms. Hill fabricated things by reading 10th Circuit opinions where Long Don Silver was mentioned, and that she got her prompting in those graphic, excruciating details from legal documents was so offensive and so strained everyone's credibility that the real issue then is him against her. And the him is a man who we had to believe had never discussed Roe versus Wade, hadn't even watched his chief accuser on television
Roe is a total
on Friday
red
afternoon.
Here.
That's hard to believe.
No, but even you didn't believe it when he said he'd never... In fact, you wrote a marvelous line.
Thank you, Carl.
What'd you call it? The only sentient person in the land who hadn't discussed Roe v. Wade? Well, that's what everybody believes. No lawyer short of the nut house has gone 18 years without discussing Roe v. Wade.
Just because a guy dances around the issue of abortion does not make him either weird or a pathological liar. This is an unbelievable connection that you're making. I just can't understand it.
Let me ask you about Anita Hill here. Cui bono, who benefits by her in her own life by her lying, if she is lying? I mean, she studied law under Robert Bork. She worked in the Reagan administration. She taught at Oral Roberts University. These are, you know, she's not a flaming liberal, I don't think.
To put it mildly.
And so what's her motivation here if she is lying?
Well, it was interesting because one of the witnesses who will testify on her behalf, I talked with him and I said, well, could she have been approved? Could there have been a misunderstanding? Is there some gray area where Clarence Thomas could have been a bit oafish or crude or coarse and she exaggerated and took it too seriously? But when Clarence Thomas sat down and said, I categorically deny absolutely every charge, that meant that he took away that gray area. You've got to believe one or the other.
One more point. She did say she would take a polygraph. She told the FBI she'd take a polygraph.
Oh, that's meaningless. Polygraphs are the most overrated. Look, a lie detector is a fantasy.
But phone logs are important.
There is no machine that detects lies. The phone log is important if you say, I never called to say hello, and somebody has a log saying that you called to say hello.
Well,
but I heard all that testimony just as you did, and all of that is open to different interpretations.
Yes, and furthermore, the original of the log is lying in Thomas's chambers, and we just have to take the word.
Nobody has questioned the credibility.
Well, nobody has seen the original.
The log is there.
Even Saturday afternoon,
you know, I don't know
they ask him, where is the original of the log?
Even Anita Hill accepted the authenticity of the log.
All right.
I don't see how anybody can go back and forth and say, I believe this person absolutely, that person absolutely. It seems to me you have two terrific people here testifying, and it seems to me the Senate is going to have a difficult time in making a choice between, if it just rests on a matter of credibility.
Let me, your question, you ask why she's doing this. Senator Thurmond threw out 5 questions Saturday afternoon. 1, he refused to date her and she's mad. 2, she didn't get a pay raise. 3, she's fantasizing or is nuts. I've forgotten the other 2, but they...
Okay. This story has touched a nerve in the public. I don't remember anything quite like it among American women. I did a private survey this week. Every single woman I talked to had a story about sexual harassment in her own life. These are women, some of them I've known for over 20 years. Women would tell me stories about men who touched their breasts in the elevator. You know, why didn't you talk to somebody about this? I had no idea this kind of thing was going on. Who would listen? Who would pay attention? Have you been hearing stories like that, Juan?
I tell you, you know, it's incredible, the outpouring. I think there's legitimate anger among American women at men. I think it part has to do with men being dominant in the society, but also has to do with the sense that women weren't heard, haven't been heard, and it reflected in the actions of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that this anger has just roared over this town, Washington, D.C., but I suspect it's roaring over the country. As you point out, Gordon, it strikes me that this is something like the way people watched the Kennedy assassination and felt that kind of common experience. That is what's happening here. It is an amazing thing. There's a danger to it that a mania can pursue, a sort of mob mentality, but clearly there is an issue here that goes deep, deep, deep into American life.
Tina, on the Hill, women members of the House charged to the committee and they weren't allowed in.
Well, it was remarkable, and I think the outpouring we can all attest to, but I think it is beginning to cool down a bit, and I think probably it's important that it should, because I think it's essential that the factual issue of whether Clarence Thomas sexually harassed Anita Hill's got to be separated from this other separate, distinct, though very important public issue of the problem of sexual harassment across the country. They can't be muddled.
I'm glad to hear Bettina say that, because Juan is right. This issue is roaring over Washington, it's roaring over this country, and it's landing on the head of one man. He has become the surrogate for all of the resentments and all of the real injuries that women have had over these years, and it's highly unfortunate that this man ought to be sitting on the railway track when a train is coming down which carries all of these common experiences. He is not responsible for millennia of the male oppression of women. He is either responsible for a single injury to a woman, or he isn't. The sexual harassment is not at issue here. The only issue here, who is telling the truth and who's not.
Yeah, but here the issue here is that you've got women who've just seen a report about the glass ceiling. They look at the White House and they see that women are not in the top level jobs. They look at the Senate, they see 2 women. They believe that everybody expects that if a woman is to get ahead or get a top level job, she's got to give up something. And they don't want a man on the Supreme Court who holds the view that this is of no consequence. So it does come back on Clarence Thomas in that respect.
Should this ugly inquiry, should these ugly things have been said in public? Should they not have been said in camera?
I think we will conclude that the nation was well served, as ugly as this thing is, by getting it out in public, because you don't lift the level of consciousness of a nation by holding things in secret rooms.
I think the nation is degraded by this process and by this hearing. It has not achieved any end other than the degradation of all involved, including the U.S. Senate. The reason I think a lot of us feel queasy about this is not because of all of the talk of the sex and the horrible language. What I think really makes people uneasy is we witnessed a public execution. And even if a man is a murderer, a public execution is a particularly degrading experience.
I think it's
even if he's guilty. And if he's innocent, it's even the more reprehensible as a national event.
You are arguing that there was no presumption of innocence here.
It's not that. It's that if this man is going to be destroyed for something he did, at least let us have the decency, as we do in the case of a real murderer, of destroying him in camera.
I think it should have. I think both should have been brought in private. It should have been. Perhaps they could have decided on an open hearing later. But the point is, when you're saying to you know, your husband, as I was yesterday, quick, get home before the kids turn on the Senate Judiciary Committee, this is a spectacle that is not good for the nation. It should have been done in private ahead of time, much earlier, so that it wouldn't be an 11th-hour explosive issue like this.
What about the leaks, Juan? Certain members of the committee are trying to focus on the leaks, which indicates, I would think, a smokescreen, trying to get away from the issue of Clarence Thomas's qualifications for the court, or whether, in fact, what Anita Hill says about him is true.
Well, I think that there's no question that the leaks actually did serve the purpose of putting this all out in front of the public, when, in fact, if they had looked at this issue privately or previously, they could have looked at it in much more detail. I think they could have given it much more scrutiny. The process is what is flawed here. But when you put it out front, when you have the leak, and the leak comes after all the consideration, the leak becomes the issue because it is so purposefully political. And that is what corrupts.
Has the press been irresponsible in this story?
I don't think so.
No, I say
it's
no.
If you get a leak of something so inflammatory and so important, you release it. I don't think that the press, as the conduit, is responsible here.
But let me disagree with you, Charles, on this business. If you're going to knock somebody out, have the principle of doing it in private. They didn't do it with Abe Fortas, or Tower, or Labor Secretary Donovan, and they're never going to do it.
Now that we've made all the appropriate remarks about how disgusting this is, let's talk about what we all love, and that's politics. It looks like hardball up there. Now, how are the Democrats doing, Carl?
Not as well as I thought they might do. I think when Clarence Thomas came in with his angry talk about lynching, he intimidated the Democrats. I watched Saturday there on the Republican side where Orrin Hatch and Arlen Specter really going for the jugular, going after Anita in every way they could. And we were getting some pussycat questions from the Democrats. I just could not believe it.
That surprised you?
I just couldn't believe it. But they don't want anybody to accuse them of being racist.
Well, I think it's a little deeper than that, Carl. I think that they don't want anyone to really say that they are out to lynch Clarence Thomas. They want it. They really don't have the burden there. The burden is on the Republicans, as you pointed out several times. The burden's on the Republicans to impeach Anita Hill's credibility, and I think that's why they have to go a little harder. I think it's smart of the Democrats to lay back. I think particularly smart, given the fact that a lot of people on the right-wing side of the fence would like to point out the various hypocrisies involved in Kennedy and Biden and others taking a shot at Thomas.
Talk about hardball politics. Here you have Clarence Thomas sitting there and having issued a categorical denial. Then he sets aside specifics and by Saturday launches into what was an absolutely mind-boggling defense that he was being indicted because throughout our history, black men have been indicted for their sexual prowess. I mean, that was raising in a cynical way the politics of race in a way that I thought was offensive and could indeed backfire for Judge Thomas.
You know, but there's cynicism here on all sides. Part of the power of Anita Hill's position is that she is implicitly saying that if you attack me too hard in your questioning, you're attacking women in general, and you're making me twice a victim of the way that...
Did she say that?
No, I'm saying implied in her position, in the way in which her case is presented, and the reason that the Republicans are, in fact, trying to be as gingerly as possible, and were as gingerly as possible in questioning her, and not to offend her personally, is because they would be seen as picking on a woman. So she has that on her side, and Clarence Thomas decided he needed an issue on his side, and he changed. He reversed the tables here, and what he says is, if you want to pick on me, you're also going after a black man who's worked his way up and who refused to kowtow to liberal orthodoxies.
And if you think at this point that this whole issue isn't politicized and highly politicized, then you're not in the game. The game is, at this point, politics heavy on both sides, and I think a lot of those senators, as we talk about politics, are going to be very sensitive to the way women view them and their vote on this issue, purely on political.
And it has nothing to do with Thomas's qualifications.
Has nothing to do with that human being under the microscope.
One side played the gender card, the other side is playing a race card. If that's the way that the game is played, at least it's going to be a level playing field.
Yes, but Tina brings up a point we ought not pass by. Thomas did bring up this business of the centuries-old stereotype It's about men and the size of their sex organs and so forth. The committee didn't bring this up. The only reason this came up is that he allegedly boasted about his own prowess and physical attributes to Anita Hill. And that's how this issue gets in here.
But
it's
if
not
Alleged by Anita Hill. She
Alleged.
brought it up.
If
Yes.
he didn't say it, it means somebody has invented this and used an old stereotype, because it would be one that might be accepted and
that's the
believed.
question.
But is this the
That's what
conspiracy
makes-
theory?
Do you
That's
think
what makes
she
it so
invented
horrible.
this?
Well,
Let me ask you
nobody
something.
knows.
It just occurred to me. Senator Hatch, Saturday morning, apparently his staff did some research. They found a line from The Exorcist about pubic hair in somebody's gin, and then they found something in a case from the Kansas 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, I think,
Utah.
relative to
Oklahoma, I'm sorry.
relative to the same language. What do you think of that?
I think it was extremely effective, and I'll tell you why. Anita Hill's power was that the details she brought out on Friday were so odd, so unusual, that you would have to imagine they had to be real, because it couldn't have been invented. So what Hatch did is he planted the thought. We don't know if it's a true thought or not, but he planted the thought. It didn't have to be real. It could have been drawn from literature, and that is not impossible.
It's not impossible. It's absolutely incredible, but that's what they did. And talk about cynical. They planted the thought. They knew their great vulnerability was no motive. She's articulate. She's intelligent. She has nothing to gain. She's been publicly humiliated. So what's her motive? Well,
Wait a second.
where did she get these details from?
How has she been publicly humiliated?
Going through that ordeal, having our inspector quiz you the way he did,
I think
she
it's
hasn't been...
difficult to go through that ordeal. I think the United States Senate tried to abide by her rules of first anonymity, trying to go with her. She was the one who then later forced the issue and has forced this thing at this point because of the leaks, and I think that's what happened.
I think a Senate staffer forced the issue. I mean, in their defense, both Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill have been put through an absolutely terrible ordeal in process that has been unfair to both of them.
But how honorable is it for her to have intended to make only an anonymous hit? That was her original intention. No names. I don't have to go in public. How honorable is that? And now to complain that she, in the end, had to go out in public.
That is why I disagreed with you earlier about doing these things in private. I would have been against them doing it in private.
Carl, you get the last word on Inside Washington. Thank you. We'll see you next week.
Tonight at 11, see highlights of today's testimony in the Clarence Thomas nomination hearings as the United States Senate continues the process of filling a vacancy on the Supreme Court. Highlights of the Thomas hearings tonight at 11 on Iowa Public Television.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television.
You are viewing Iowa Public Television. Tonight, enter the world of showbiz with Lawrence Welk. Enjoy an hour of British comedy and see Elizabeth Taylor star in this week's movie classic.
Next on Masterpiece Theater.
I thought she was insufferable.
She made being holier than thou into something of a profession.
Maybe she got what she deserved.
You're not to scream, you're not to be sick. This is a police matter. You're not to say anything to anybody. Do you understand, dear?
Denham Elliott is George Smiley. Glenda Jackson, his trusted colleague, in John le Carré's A Murder of Quality.
Sunday at 9 on Iowa Public Television.
This baby was 9 months in the making and eagerly anticipated. But the story doesn't end there. From first steps and first words through the passage into adulthood, this is a journey we've all taken, childhood. 7 programs that explore a world we know, but one which can still surprise us. You'll meet children from 12 families on 5 continents and discover how your own childhood has made you what you are today, childhood.
Watch for the premiere program Monday at 7.
The Civil War. A white man's battle which became a victory for thousands of black soldiers who won the right to fight. The Massachusetts 54th Colored Infantry. Join us next time on the American Experience.
See it Monday at 8 on Iowa Public Television.
Next time on Nova, the Dead Sea Scrolls. What secrets do these ancient texts hold? Will they dramatically change religious history for Jews, for Christians? Controversy has shrouded these documents right down to the present day. Now that the texts have finally been released, are we on the brink of unlocking the secrets of